My 8-year-old daughter was left in foster care by my parents while they flew to Hawaii with my sister's kids. The note said, "Sorry, sweetie, we just couldn't take care of her." I didn't shout, I just filed a quiet report. Next morning, there was a violent knock on their hotel door. "My name is Mara Bennett and I'm 29 years old." The white paper on the exam table crinkled under me, a sound as thin and sharp as the anxiety tightening my chest. I stared at a cheerful poster of a smiling baby on the wall, trying to breathe. Dr. Laura Chen, my OB, sat on her rolling stool, her face a mask of professional calm that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The baby's heart rate is showing some dips," she said, her voice even. "It's probably nothing to worry about, but at 36 weeks I don't like to take chances." My hand went instinctively to my swollen belly, a protective gesture that had become second nature. "What does that mean?" "It means I want to admit you to the hospital for monitoring, immediate monitoring," she clarified, tapping her pen on my chart. "Just for a few days so we can keep a close eye on things. Make sure this little one isn't in a hurry to arrive before he's ready." The words possible early labor and immediate monitoring swam in my head, a dizzying current of fear. My husband, Cal, was deployed. His voice on the phone last night had been a lifeline stretched thin across thousands of miles of ocean. He was full of love, full of worry, but he was physically unable to help. He couldn't hold my hand or drive me to the hospital or be here for this conversation. My first thought, selfishly, wasn't about the baby. It was about Sophie, my daughter. My bright, funny 8-year-old girl who was probably at home right now, carefully finishing her homework at the kitchen table. I pictured the drawing she'd taped to our fridge last week, 3 stick figures under a ridiculously happy sun. Me with a big round tummy, her with a wild scribble of brown hair, and Cal in his army uniform, our little universe of 3, soon to be 4. The phone in my purse suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My in-laws lived in another state. My friends all had jobs and kids and complicated lives of their own. There was only one option, the only people close enough, the only people who were family. I had to call them. I found their number in my contacts and took one last deep, shaky breath before I pressed the call button. My mom, Linda, answered on the third ring. Her voice was slightly breathless, distracted. In the background, I could hear a familiar symphony of chaos, the shriek of a cartoon cat, the thud of running feet, and a high-pitched argument over a toy. "Mara, hi honey. Is everything okay? I'm at the doctor's office," I began, trying to keep my voice from trembling. I could already hear my sister Tracy's kids in the background, which meant it was already a full house over there. "The doctor wants to keep me in the hospital for a few days for observation. The baby, they just need to watch the baby." I heard Mom sigh, a little puff of inconvenience. "Oh honey, of course that's stressful. But Tracy just dropped her 3 off for the night. It's going to be a madhouse here." There it was. The old, familiar dance. Tracy's life was a constant 5-alarm fire, a series of self-made emergencies and last-minute requests. My life, in comparison, was just a smoldering inconvenience. Her needs were urgent, mine were obligations. A flicker of resentment sparked in my chest, hot and quick, but I stamped it down. I didn't have the luxury of being resentful right now. I needed help. Dad Frank must have taken the phone. His voice, deep and booming, was a wave of manufactured reassurance. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mara girl. We've got Sophie. You just focus on cooking that grandson of mine a little longer." A rush of gratitude washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. It pushed away the resentment, the feeling of being a second-class daughter. They lived 10 minutes away, they were retired, they always said how much they adored their grandkids. This is what family was for, I told myself. This is what they do. Mom got back on the line. "He's right, sweetie, we'll make it work. Listen, with this many kids in the house, I'll need some extra cash for groceries. And you know how they are, they'll want pizza or takeout at some point. I don't want to dip into our savings." "Of course, Mom." "No problem," I said, already digging in my purse for my wallet. I didn't hesitate. I read the numbers off my credit card to her, the expiration date, the 3 little digits on the back. It was for juice boxes and frozen pizzas, for bread and milk and maybe a movie rental. It was for peace of mind. A small price to pay to know my daughter was safe while I was stuck in a hospital bed tethered to a machine. Sophie clung to my leg when I dropped her off, her small face buried in my jeans. The smell of my parents' house, a mix of potpourri and whatever Dad had cooked for lunch, wrapped around us. It was a smell I used to associate with comfort. Today, it just felt off. "I don't want you to go, Mommy," she whispered, her voice muffled. I knelt, my big belly making it awkward, and hugged her tight. "I know, sweetie, but I have to make sure your little brother is okay. Grandma and Grandpa are going to take such good care of you. You'll have fun with your cousins." Mom came over and gave me a tight, brittle hug, her hands patting my back a little too hard. "You just go focus on that baby," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "We've got this, don't you worry about a thing." The first night in the hospital was a blur of beeping machines and nurses checking my blood pressure. But then Sophie called and the world snapped back into focus. Her voice was buzzing with excitement. "Mommy, Grandma made us pancakes for dinner with chocolate chips, and then we all watched a movie with popcorn. It was so cool." I relaxed against the starchy hospital pillows, the tension easing out of my shoulders. "That sounds amazing, honey. Are you being a good helper?" "Yes." I helped clear the table. The second night she called again, just as happy. "We played in the sprinkler today, even though it's not summer, and my cousin Liam shared his new Lego set with me." I listened to her happy chatter, my heart swelling. I told her I loved her more than all the stars in the sky. I told her the baby was doing fine, just being a little stubborn, and that I'd be home before she knew it. The fear I'd been carrying started to feel foolish. They were stepping up, they were being the grandparents I always hoped they would be. On the third day, the phone in my room was silent. I waited until after dinner, then called my mom's cell. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Dad's. Same thing, I sent a text. "Hey, hope everything's okay. Haven't heard from Sophie. Can you have her call me?" Hours passed. No reply. I told myself they were just busy. A house with 4 kids under the age of 9 is pure chaos. They were probably at the park, or maybe their phones died. There were 100 logical explanations, but the cold knot forming deep in my stomach didn't care about logic. The silence from that house just 10 minutes down the road was starting to feel too loud. Dr. Chen discharged me a week after I was admitted. The baby had stabilized, content to stay put for a little while longer. The relief was so immense it made my knees weak. I thanked the nurses, signed the paperwork, and practically ran to my car. I didn't even go home first. I drove straight to my parents' house, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a mix of pure excitement to see Sophie and that lingering, humming dread. Their house was dark. The curtains were drawn and there were no cars in the driveway. A stack of newspapers lay on the porch, their edges curled and damp. The silence was heavy, unnatural. It wasn't the quiet of an empty house. It was the quiet of an abandoned one. I knocked on the front door, the sound echoing flatly. I rang the doorbell, listening to the familiar chime inside. Nothing. A prickle of real fear traced its way up my spine. I fumbled in my purse for the spare key they'd given me years ago, my fingers clumsy and shaking. The key turned in the lock. I pushed the door open. The house was empty, not just empty of people, but sterile. The floors were freshly vacuumed. The counters were wiped clean. There wasn't a single toy on the floor or a stray sock on the stairs. There was no sign that 4 children had been living here, no evidence of the happy chaos Sophie had described on the phone. And then I saw it. A single piece of ripped notebook paper taped crookedly to the inside of the front door, positioned so I wouldn't miss it on my way out. The handwriting was my mother's, a familiar, spiky scrawl in blue ink. It wasn't a letter, it was barely a note, just 5 words. "Sorry, sweetie, we couldn't take her." No name, no phone number, no explanation, just a gutless, anonymous excuse hanging in the silent air. My legs gave out and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. I stumbled back to my car, the note crumpled in my fist, my mind a blank wall of white noise except for a single screaming question: where is my daughter? My first instinct was to call 911 to report her missing, but the note wasn't from a kidnapper, it was from my mother. A single logical thought cut through the fog of panic: child services. If they couldn't take her, they had to have taken her somewhere. I drove to the County Family Services building, a gray, soulless place that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I felt like a failure walking through those automatic doors, my pregnant belly leading the way. The shame was a physical weight on my shoulders. I was the mom who had to walk into a government office and ask the woman at the front desk if they had my child as if she were a lost coat. The woman, whose name tag read Brenda, looked up at me over her glasses, her face a mask of professional neutrality. She'd seen it all before. I was just another crisis walking through her door. "My name is Mara Bennett," I said, my voice thin and reedy. I think my parents might have brought my daughter here. Her name is Sophie Bennett." Brenda typed the name into her computer, her nails making little clicking sounds on the keyboard. She stared at the screen for a moment, her expression unchanging. "Yes, Sophie Bennett was brought to intake 4 days ago," she said, her voice flat, "by a woman identifying as her grandmother." The world tilted on its axis and sent me spinning into a dark, cold place. 4 days? Sophie had been here in foster care in a strange place with strange people for 4 days. While I was in the hospital thinking she was safe, thinking she was eating pancakes and playing with her cousins, she was here. Alone. They brought her to me in a small, quiet room with a few worn-out toys in the corner. She looked so small, so lost. Her hair wasn't brushed and she was wearing a t-shirt I didn't recognize. She saw me and her face crumpled, but she didn't make a sound. She just ran into my arms and held on, burying her face in my stomach, her little body trembling. It was worse than crying. The silence was a scream. Later, buckled into her car seat, she finally spoke. Her voice was a tiny whisper, barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Grandma said I was too much trouble." At home, I ran a warm bath for Sophie and let her soak until her fingers were wrinkled. I washed her hair and wrapped her in the fluffiest towel we owned. I tucked her into her own bed under her favorite unicorn comforter and read to her until her breathing deepened into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. She wouldn't let go of my hand, her small fingers still clutching mine even after she drifted off. I sat at the kitchen table, the silence of my own house pressing in on me. The crumpled note from my parents' door lay on the table, a venomous little piece of trash. I'd tried calling all of them again: Mom, Dad, Tracy. Every call went straight to voicemail. Their phones were either off or they were actively ignoring me. On a morbid whim, desperate for any clue, I opened my banking app. Maybe they'd used the credit card at a motel. Maybe there would be a charge that could tell me where they were. The balance on the screen made my stomach heave. I scrolled through the recent transactions, my breath catching in my throat. The charges weren't for groceries, they weren't for pizza. The first one was for $5,840. The merchant, Hawaiian Airlines. My blood ran cold. I kept scrolling. $3,960, a Marriott oceanfront resort in Maui. $742, the Grand Wailea Spa. The list went on, a cascading nightmare of debits. $188 for room service, $419 for something called Sunrise Boat Tour. It added up to over $11,000. They didn't just leave her, they didn't just get overwhelmed. This was a plan. They had used my medical emergency, my trust, my money to fund their tropical paradise. And they had paid for it by dumping my 8-year-old daughter into the system like a piece of unwanted luggage. My hands were shaking, but my mind was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. I closed the banking app and opened Instagram. I went straight to my sister Tracy's page. It wasn't set to private. She loved an audience, and there it was, all of it, posted publicly for the whole world to see. The first picture was from 2 days ago. My mom, my dad, Tracy, and her 3 kids all grinning at an airport wearing cheap floral lace around their necks. My dad had his arm around my nephew, pointing at something off camera. My mom was beaming. The caption, posted by Tracy, read, "Surprise family vacation, time to make some memories that will last a lifetime. Blessed family first." I scrolled down, my thumb moving with a mechanical steadiness. A video of my nephews splashing in a massive, sparkling resort pool. A selfie of Tracy and Mom at the spa, their faces slathered in green goop, clinking glasses of what looked like champagne. My dad grinning from ear to ear on a boat, the ocean a picture-perfect, impossible blue behind him. Every photo was a dagger twisting in my gut. Every happy, carefree caption was a lie. They weren't just on vacation. They were performing a fantasy of a perfect, happy family. A fantasy they had created on my credit card, a fantasy that never included me, a fantasy they were willing to abandon my daughter to achieve. Sophie was nowhere in the pictures. It was as if she'd never existed. She hadn't just been left behind, she'd been erased. She was the price of admission to their Hawaiian paradise. My anger began to cool, hardening into something cold and sharp. I started taking screenshots, every single photo, every caption, every timestamp. My own family, so proud of their deception, was providing me with Exhibit A. Finally, my phone rang, buzzing angrily on the kitchen table. The caller ID said it was Tracy. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. Her voice was breezy, cheerful, as if she were calling to chat about the weather. "Hey. We're having the absolute best time. You would not believe the view from our room," she chirped. I didn't let her continue. "Where is Mom?" My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. There was a slight pause. "Oh, she's down at the pool with the kids. What's up?" The casualness, the sheer nerve of it was breathtaking. "You left Sophie," I said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. The silence on her end was brief but telling. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its breezy tone. "Look, Mom got totally overwhelmed. Sophie was just crying for you all the time. It was a lot for her to handle with her own 3 kids to worry about." "So you dumped her at a county office?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "She's not my kid, Mara," Tracy snapped back, her tone turning sharp and defensive. "I have 3 of my own to worry about. Mom and Dad deserved a break. They've been so stressed." The logic was so twisted, so profoundly selfish, it almost stole my breath. My daughter's safety and well-being were an inconvenience, an obstacle to their well-deserved vacation. "I saw the charges, Tracy," I said, my voice like ice. "On my credit card." "Oh, that," she said, her tone instantly dismissive, as if I'd brought up a $5 loan. "Mom was totally going to pay you back. You know how she is with money. Don't be so dramatic." She must have passed the phone to my mother then, because the next voice I heard was thick with false sympathy and a heavy dose of martyrdom. It was a tone she'd perfected over years of creating problems and then positioning herself as the victim of their consequences. "Mara, sweetie, I am so sorry. It just got to be too much," she began, the well-rehearsed apology already rolling off her tongue. "Sophie just wouldn't stop crying. She missed you so much, and I was worried sick about you and the baby, and then with Tracy's 3 little terrors running around, it was just impossible." She painted a picture of herself as a helpless, sainted grandmother, crushed under the emotional weight of a sad 8-year-old. She conveniently left out the part where she was simultaneously booking spa treatments and boat tour online. "We just couldn't handle her," she said, and the phrase landed like a punch, echoing Sophie's heartbroken whisper in the car. "Too much trouble, so you abandoned her," I stated, refusing to soften the words, refusing to let her hide behind euphemisms. "It wasn't like that," she insisted, her voice rising with indignation. "We made sure she was safe. We took her to that county place. The people there were very nice, they knew exactly what to do." She described the family services intake office as if it were a summer camp drop-off, a perfectly reasonable option for a child who had become an inconvenience. There was no remorse in her voice, only justification. The vacation, she implied, was a necessary balm for the stress my child had caused her. "And the credit card will sort all that out when we get back," she added, as if it were a minor bookkeeping error. "Don't make a big deal out of nothing, Mara. You know how it gives me a headache." I hung up the phone without saying another word. The conversation was a closed loop of excuses, justifications, and blame shifting. There would be no apology, there would be no glimmer of understanding. They lived in a different reality, one where their whims and desires justified any and all collateral damage. My daughter was the collateral damage. I walked back into Sophie's room and stood in the doorway watching her sleep. Her face was finally peaceful, her favorite stuffed bunny tucked under her arm. I had trusted them. I had put my child, my precious, irreplaceable child, in their care, and they had discarded her. I had failed to protect her from them. That was a mistake I would never make again. This wasn't about getting my money back anymore. This wasn't about a family squabble that could be smoothed over with a forced apology at Thanksgiving. This was about a crime, 2 crimes, child abandonment and felony credit card fraud. The anger was no longer a hot, raging fire. It was a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach. It was fuel. I went back to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and created a new folder on the desktop. I named it simply Evidence. One by one, I dragged the screenshots from Tracy's Instagram feed into the folder. I saved the picture of the note. I downloaded the bank statement. My revenge wouldn't be screaming matches on the phone. It wouldn't be dramatic confrontations. It would be documentation. It would be quiet, it would be precise, and it would be absolute. The next morning, I moved with a chilling sense of purpose. Sleep had been impossible, but my exhaustion was overridden by a surge of cold adrenaline. First, I went to my bank. I walked up to the counter and asked for a full, printed statement of every charge on my credit card from the last 2 weeks. The teller, a kind-looking woman named Maria, watched with a concerned expression as her printer churned out the pages. She saw the airline and resort fees and looked at me with open pity, highlighting each of the fraudulent charges for me without me even having to ask. Back at home, I printed the screenshots from Tracy's social media in color. I arranged them in chronological order, creating a perfect, damning timeline of their spontaneous family vacation. The airport photo with the timestamp, the poolside video, the spa selfie, it was all there. I took a high-quality, close-up photo of the note they'd left on the door. The childish scrawl of "sorry, we couldn't take her" looked even more pathetic and cruel on my computer screen. I sat down and wrote out a clear, unemotional timeline of events, starting with the call from my OBS office. I documented the drop-off, the last phone call with Sophie, the days of silence, and the discovery at the empty house. I included the exact information from the county office, the date and time Sophie was logged into their intake system. I even called the county office back and, after some persistence, got the name of the social worker who had processed Sophie. I added her name to my notes. I was building a case, not just telling a story of a daughter who'd been wronged. Every piece of paper, every digital file was a brick in the wall I was building between them and my children. Walking into the local police station felt surreal, like I was an actor in a television show. My hands were steady as I carried a thick manila folder containing all my documents. I was directed to a small, cluttered desk where I sat down with an officer named Ethan Ward. He looked young, with a serious face and tired eyes, and I had a sudden fear that he wouldn't take me seriously. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I laid everything out for him, piece by piece, as if I were a witness describing something that had happened to a stranger. My parents used my medical emergency to abandon my 8-year-old daughter and leave her with Child Protective Services, I began, my voice even and controlled. Then they flew to Hawaii using my credit card, which I had given them for groceries. I pushed the folder across the desk toward him. He opened it and his eyebrows shot up. He flipped through the bank statements, his eyes scanning the outrageous charges. He paused at the glossy, printed screenshots from Instagram, then at the photo of the note. He stopped at the picture of my smiling family wearing leis in Hawaii. He looked from the photo to the bank statement and then back to me. "This is your sister's public social media profile?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes." He read my timeline slowly, his expression growing grimmer with each line. He was quiet for a long time after he finished, just staring at the contents of the folder spread across his desk. "This is incredibly thorough, Mrs. Bennett," he finally said, and a tiny bit of the weight on my chest lifted. He believed me. He explained the process carefully. He could immediately file a fraud report for the credit card charges. The child abandonment was more complicated as it technically happened in a different county at my parents' house, but the report would start here. Then he said something that surprised me. "Given the circumstances," he said, tapping the resort charge on the bank statement, "I can also make a courtesy call to the local police department in Maui. I can request that they perform a wellness check on your parents just to ask them a few questions." He admitted it wasn't a standard procedure, but the combination of the fraud and the abandonment was alarming enough for him to make the call. Officer Ward was true to his word. I didn't know it at the time, but later I was able to piece together exactly what happened. I imagined the scene with a grim sort of satisfaction. My parents, relaxed and sun-drenched after a day at the spa, maybe sipping expensive Mai Tais on their private balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. They were living their best life, paid for by me. Then came a knock on their hotel room door, not room service, not housekeeping. It was a member of the hotel's security staff and a local Maui police officer. They weren't there to arrest them, not yet. They were just there to ask some questions. Questions about the credit card used to book the $1,000 a night suite. The name on the card was Mara Bennett, but the names on their driver's licenses were Linda and Frank Bennett. Questions about the 8-year-old child they were supposed to be watching back on the mainland. The public humiliation was the first real consequence. Being questioned by the police, treated like criminals in the lobby of the luxury resort they had chosen for their fantasy escape. It didn't take long for the fallout to reach me. My phone shrieked and my mother's name flashed on the screen. Her voice wasn't apologetic or frightened. It was a howl of pure, undiluted rage. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "You sent the police after us in front of everyone. They treated us like common thieves." "I filed a report," I said calmly, my voice a quiet counterpoint to her hysteria. "For what you did to Sophie, for the money you stole. You are trying to ruin us," she screamed. "After everything we have ever done for you, you ungrateful girl." The line went dead. The first shot had been fired in a war I didn't want, but one I was determined to win. The initial shock on their end quickly morphed into a calculated rage. The next call came from Tracy. She didn't yell. Her voice was low and menacing, colder than any screaming match could ever be. "You've made a huge mistake, Mara," she hissed. "A huge, huge mistake. You think you can do this to our family and there won't be consequences. You have no idea what you've just started. The consequences are for you, Tracy, and for Mom and Dad, not for me," I replied, my voice as cold and steady as hers. "We'll see about that," she said, and the line clicked dead. The dynamic had changed. They were no longer trying to justify their actions with flimsy excuses. Now they were planning to retaliate. In their minds, my police report wasn't a consequence of their horrific behavior. It was an unprovoked attack. I had declared war on the family and they were preparing their counteroffensive. I had burned the bridge. There was no going back to pretending, no more awkward holiday dinners or forced smiles. I knew this would happen. I was prepared for it. Let them come, I thought, looking at the evidence folder still open on my desktop. I'll be ready. The attack began subtly, a poison whispered into the ears of people I'd known my whole life. My mom got on the phone with her friends from church, a network of gossips who could spread a story faster than wildfire. The story she told was a masterpiece of fiction, casting her as the long-suffering mother and me as the unstable, ungrateful daughter. She claimed I'd been erratic and unstable ever since the pregnancy began. She told them I was hormonal and prone to dramatic meltdowns. The Hawaii trip, she explained, wasn't a vacation. It was a desperately needed escape to recover from the stress and verbal abuse I had supposedly heaped upon them. A few days later, a neighbor I used to be friendly with, a woman named Sarah, stopped me while I was getting the mail. She gave me a look of deep, profound pity. "Linda told me you've been having a really hard time lately," she said, her voice oozing with condescending sympathy. "Pregnancy can be so overwhelming. If you ever need to talk to someone you know professionally." The implication was as clear as it was insulting. I was the crazy one. They were the victims. They were methodically poisoning the well, turning my own community against me, isolating me so that when the real story came out, no one would believe me. I didn't argue with Sarah. I didn't try to defend myself. Arguing with someone who has already been brainwashed is a waste of breath. I just gave her a tight, polite smile and said, "I'm fine, thank you," before walking back inside my house. They returned from Hawaii a week later, not with their tails between their legs, but with a renewed sense of vengeance. Their next move was more direct and far more vicious. A huge bouquet of funereal-looking white lilies was delivered to Sophie's elementary school, addressed directly to her. I got a call from the principal, a wonderful woman named Mrs. Davis, her voice tight with concern. "Mara, a delivery just arrived for Sophie," she said. "I haven't given it to her. I wanted to speak with you first. The card is troubling." I drove to the school immediately. She handed me the ostentatious bouquet and the small card attached. The flowers reeked of a sickly, sweet smell like a funeral home. The card, in my mother's familiar cursive, read, "We miss our sweet Sophie girl so much. We're so sorry Mommy is keeping us apart." I took a picture of the flowers and the note with my phone before I dumped the entire bouquet into a trash can in the school parking lot. This was a new low. They were no longer just trying to manage their reputation. They were actively using my 8-year-old daughter as a pawn, trying to poison her against me. They were trying to hurt me through my child. The anger I felt was so pure and so potent it felt like a physical force, a white-hot energy coursing through me. The line they had just crossed was the last one. The knock on my own front door came 2 days later. I opened it to find a calm, professional-looking woman with a kind face and tired eyes. She held up an ID badge. "Mara Bennett?" she asked gently. "My name is Dana Cole. I'm with Child Protective Services." My blood ran cold, but a part of me wasn't surprised. I knew this was coming. This was their checkmate. "We received an anonymous report," she said, her voice soft but firm, "alleging some instability in the home, possible neglect. I'm just here to do a routine check and make sure everything is okay with your daughter." I took a deep breath and stepped aside, inviting her in. "Please, come in." My house was clean. The kitchen was stocked with groceries. Sophie was sitting at her little art table in the living room, focused on a drawing, a rainbow of crayons spread out around her. Dana Cole was thorough but gentle. She interviewed me in the kitchen and I told her the entire story calmly and chronologically. I didn't cry or raise my voice. I simply gave her the facts and then I showed her the evidence folder, the police report number, the bank statements, the screenshots, the manipulative note from the flowers. She looked through it all with an unreadable expression. Then she spoke with Sophie, asking her a few gentle questions about her school and her friends. When she asked about her grandparents, Sophie just shook her head and pressed herself against my side, burying her face in my hip. Her silence, her fear, was more powerful than any accusation they could ever invent. The visit felt like it lasted an eternity. I was being judged and evaluated in my own home, my fitness as a mother called into question, all because of their malicious lies. When Dana finally stood to leave, she offered a small, reassuring smile. "I think I have everything I need," she said. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Bennett. We'll be in touch." I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, my entire body trembling. This was their nuclear option and they had used it. They had tried to have my daughter taken away from me. The CPS visit was the last straw. When Dana closed her little notebook and said she had what she needed, something in me unclenched and then tightened into a new shape. I couldn't keep waiting for the next lie, the next anonymous complaint, the next delivery meant to confuse or intimidate. I thought of Sophie's drawing of our family and of the way she'd looked at me when she handed it to me. Trust wrapped in crayon. I thought of that crooked note on my parents' door and how casual Mom had sounded when she shrugged about leaving my child. There was no middle ground left. I could keep hoping they'd change, keep letting them back into our lives and be surprised every time they stabbed us, or I could move us out of their range, out of town, and lock this behind a new set of doors. So I started planning like someone who never expected to be sentimental again. I opened a real estate site and scrolled until my eyes blurred. Small towns 2 to 3 hours away, places with decent schools and yards big enough for a lemon tree. I bookmarked a little blue house, not a mansion, not even a dream home, just a tidy rental with a yard and a porch paint color that made me smile. I pictured Sophie running across that yard without looking back over her shoulder. I pictured a front step we could close and mean it. I made lists, movers, checklists, which trusted neighbor to give our new address to and which friends to tell later. I penciled in a moving date and told myself we'd be gone before the baby came. The idea of leaving behind the town where my family's gossip could reach into every PTA meeting felt like cutting a cord. It was painful and final, and I let it be both. I packed a mental box of memories I wasn't ready to keep and sealed it. This was about safety, not revenge, a clean, practical severing. I taped locations and passwords and the county police report number into the folder and closed it. There was fear humming under the resolve, but it was quieter than anything I had felt in weeks. This was the only sane way out. When Cal walked through the door 2 days later, I felt my knees give in a different way. He looked tired, thinner than the last picture I'd had of him, but he was home. He set his duffel down by the coat rack, and for a long moment all I could do was stare at him as if he were the answer to a prayer. He hugged me slow, like he was trying to memorize the sound of my bones. Sophie bolted across the room and threw herself into his arms, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I let myself breathe. We sat at the kitchen table with the evidence folder spread out between us like a map of what had been done to us. Cal turned the pages slowly, his fingers tracing the columns of charges and the Instagram photos as if he were trying to understand why anyone would do this. He listened to everything, the hospital stay, the phone calls, the note, the social media stream, without interruption. When I finished, he didn't yell or slam his fist on the table. He folded his hands and said quietly, "Okay." It wasn't a small word, it was an order to himself and to me. "This is a security operation now," he said. "Protect the assets, that's you, Sophie, and the little guy." He put his hand on my belly like a shield. He changed things the way a person who knew how to make plans did. He called his command and the word came back. Hardship leave approved. He kissed the top of my head and suddenly the house that had felt fragile felt steadier. With him home, the strategy shifted from reactive to active. We were no longer just gathering proof. We were planning how to keep our daughters safe and make this house a fortress instead of a target. The first practical thing we did was call Sophie's school. We met with Mrs. Davis and set up a new pickup routine that felt like armor. We created a secret password for pickups and made a written list of authorized people, just Cal and me, no exceptions. The principal agreed to refuse any gifts or deliveries addressed to Sophie without our explicit consent. Then we blocked Mom and Dad's numbers and Tracy's and Eric's on every device we owned. There's a strange, muffled relief that comes when you stop expecting an important call and realize you've done the thing that feels most like safety. You've turned the phone into an island. Cal installed a doorbell camera and motion-activated lights the next day. The sound of the camera's little mechanical click when it powered up made me feel less exposed. We put up a few small outdoor cameras where the street light caught the yard, and he set up a cloud account for the footage so nothing could be deleted without both our passwords. He explained it simply: cameras are witnesses. We told our trusted neighbor, Mrs. Patel, what had happened and asked her to call us, not Mom and Dad, if she ever saw them near the house. She squeezed my hand and said, "You tell me once who to call. I won't let anyone come by without checking with you." It felt like a pact. We changed our routines too. Cal started dropping Sophie at school instead of me, and he picked her up, buying us extra minutes where neither of them could surprise us. We cleared out social media friends who were connected to Mom's circle and tightened privacy settings. I changed my own voicemail greeting to something dry and businesslike, and I stopped going to the grocery store at the times I used to, just in case. The house felt different under these new rules, quiet but not empty. It felt deliberate, defended. We were setting the perimeter and we meant to hold it. Then the first real breach came. It was small and ugly in its simplicity. Sophie came home from school with her backpack bouncing, lips stained with grape juice, and handed me a folded scrap of paper like it was nothing. I was unloading groceries and didn't notice the way her cheeks had gone pale until she was at the table, emptying her folder. "Mommy," she said and held the paper out. I unfolded it to see a single, ugly word scrawled in heavy block letters, liar. For a second my brain tried to file it as childish nastiness. Then the old cold spread through me. Someone had slipped this into her bag during the day. Someone had known enough to reach her, to get into a place I thought we'd sealed off. Sophie shrugged like it was just a piece of trash she didn't need. "I thought it was on the floor," she said. Cal went still beside me, a slow muscle in his jaw working. We did what we'd been training ourselves to do. I took a picture. He went to the security system and rewound the footage from the afternoon drop-off. The cameras didn't show the school bus interior, of course, but the street camera caught a car driving slowly past our house around the time the bus dropped Sophie off. The driver obscured their face and the license plate was fuzzy at best. It wasn't enough to indict anyone in court, but it was enough to add to the folder. I slid the photo of the note into the evidence folder and Cal uploaded the clip of the car. Each click felt like a promise. We would not be baited. We would not be dragged into a spectacle. We turned the small, mean thing into a piece of documentation, another item in the long list of reasons we were leaving. The violation prickled under my skin, but it didn't topple me. It hardened my resolve. If they wanted a war of notes and whispers, we would respond with something they could not erase, proof. We woke that morning to something that felt like a dare. I swung my feet out of bed, found slippers, and opened the front door expecting to see a stray newspaper or a neighbor's forgotten package. Instead, the porch was a mess of birdseed, thick as a blanket, spilled in a sloppy semicircle across the mat and the first step. Tiny shells and hulls glittered in the sun like someone had poured cheap confetti for no reason. For a second I just stood there, the cold of the morning on my face, and felt the stupid, childish anger rise up. Then I noticed the smell, wet seed and something stale, and how it left the whole entryway sticky. Cal came out blinking in his t-shirt, saw the mess, and his face went tight. "They did this on purpose," he said like it was obvious. It felt almost petty, except it wasn't. It was testing. A small, invasive thing meant to tell us they could still reach us. It was meant to make us do something foolish, to call, to scream, to come unglued in front of anybody who might be watching. I had spent the last few weeks learning how not to give them that satisfaction. Cal pointed to the security monitor. We rewound the footage from 2 in the morning. The picture was grainy, the porch light a weak moon. At 2:03, a figure in a dark hoodie moved fast across the frame, bag in hand. They stopped, tipped the bag, and scattered seed like they were sowing a message. The figure hunched and ran back to a low car waiting at the curb. We watched it twice, then again in slow motion. The camera couldn't make out a face. The plate was a blur. Cal didn't say much. He swept the seed into a trash bag with a practiced quiet. We swept together, no words other than keep the footage and upload it. That had become our ritual, notarize the small cruelties so they lost their power. I photographed the porch after we'd cleaned it, the welcome mat with a thin, dull stripe where seed had been ground into the fibers. I uploaded the clip and the picture to the evidence folder, labeled and dated. It felt absurdly comforting, like locking the door and turning the bolt. When Dana called a few days later, my hands were actually shaking because every stranger who said the word investigation made something in my chest tight. The number flashed and I almost didn't pick up, but I did. Her voice came through, calm and a little hesitant. "Mrs. Bennett, this is Dana Cole from Child Protective Services. I thought you already closed our visit," I said. My mouth was dry. Sophie was drawing at the kitchen table in the next room, humming to herself. "We did close the investigation," Dana said. "Unfounded, your home is safe and the complaint didn't hold up." A soft relief brightened my shoulders. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. "Thank you," I said and meant it. There was a pause. Her tone lowered. "There's one more thing I can say off the record, just as a professional heads up." Her voice sounded careful, like she was walking across thin ice. "The anonymous report, that form you think was sent by nobody, it wasn't anonymous, it left a trail." My stomach skidded. "What do you mean?" "Someone filed the report using the guest Wi-Fi at the resort in Maui where your parents were staying. The connection logs point there." She hesitated, then added, "The email tied to the submission belongs to an Eric Nolan." The name landed like a stone. Eric Nolan, Tracy's husband. The image of them all sunburned and laughing by the pool came back clear and terrible. I could almost hear Tracy's calm, warning voice. "You've made a huge mistake." She'd said it like a promise. Dana was careful not to overstep. "I can't put the IP address in writing without a court order," she told me, "but I can write a short note confirming the complaint was malicious and unsubstantiated." Her tone was as close to sympathy as the job allowed. "I'm sorry you had to go through this." I felt a cold satisfaction that had nothing to do with gloating. It was the feeling of being right and finally having proof. I thanked her and tried not to sound grateful for a fact that proved how low they'd gone. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table with the phone still warm in my hand and imagined the whole scene in Maui. The two of them, my parents and Tracy and Eric, booking the trip, sipping at the pool while they typed a form that claimed I was unfit. They had plotted to take my child, or at least to intimidate me into silence while they lounged on my dime. That confirmation changed everything. This wasn't panic or a mom's over suspicion. It was coordinated. It was planned. It was deliberately cruel in a way that left no room for excuses. I replayed every small thing: the lilies at school, the note in Sophie's backpack, the birdseed, and they stitched together into a deliberate pattern, not a tantrum. When Cal heard, he closed the laptop and looked at me like he wanted to break the world open and fix it. He said, without shouting, "They're attacking us on multiple fronts. This isn't family drama. It's harassment." He sounded like a soldier talking strategy, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt truly backed up. He had that look he got when he had to make a tough choice in the line of duty. Calm, focused, and tired. "We're done hoping they'll change," he said. "We have to make sure they can't touch us again." The idea of a peaceful retreat, quietly moving away, planting a lemon tree, closing the door suddenly felt naive. This wasn't just about distance. It was about removing the people who'd shown they would weaponize my family against me. We had to be gone, and we had to make sure we were out of reach before the baby came. The next OB visit made the urgency real in my bones. Dr. Chen examined me under the hospital light, that same careful expression on her face, and said, "You're 39 weeks now, Mara. This baby could come any day." She ran the Doppler over my belly, and I listened to the steady thud of our son's heart, a stubborn drummer that had held on through everything. "If you want to avoid the risk of going into labor spontaneously, we could induce next week," she said. The words had a practical flatness to them. Her voice was not threatening, it was realistic. The thought of being admitted with a newborn and my family still in town made bile rise in my throat. What if they showed up at the hospital? What if they tried to manipulate the staff with their stories? I imagined some cruel stunt at the maternity ward, a bouquet delivered with a card that said, "We're so sorry Mommy is keeping us apart." The image made my skin crawl. We had to leave before the baby, not because we were cowards, but because we had a duty to our children to create a safe beginning. Cal took the lead on logistics the way he always did when things needed doing. He called moving companies, spoke to the landlord of the little blue house, and made sure the lease could start the week we planned. I packed with a kind of fierce economy, folding up Sophie's favorite unicorn blanket and my maternity clothes and a stack of books. Each item I put into a box felt like a choice about what to keep and what to leave. I wrote a moving date on the calendar, Saturday, 5 days from now, and taped a map to the fridge. Packing was strange. It felt like making a life while dragging the old one behind me in a long, thin train. I took small comforts: a casserole dish from my grandmother, Sophie's drawings, a few of Cal's old army patches. I stayed away from anything that would tie us back to them: photos of mom and dad, any cards with their handwriting. It hurt, a quiet pinching ache to make that decision, but every time Sophie looked up from her crayons and smiled, it felt right. The ticking clock of the pregnancy had fallen into rhythm with the ticking plan. We would be out before the baby came. We would leave them with the note on their door and the folder on file. We would not be baited into drama. We would go, small and determined, into a life they couldn't reach. Dana Cole's off-the-record tip felt like the last missing stitch in a torn sweater. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone as if heat might rise off it and burn me. I called Officer Ward right away, my voice steadier than I felt. I told him everything Dana had said: the Marriott connection, the email address tied to Eric Nolan, that someone had used guest Wi-Fi in Maui to file the anonymous complaint. There was a pause on his end, a sound like a man sorting facts in his head. "That changes things," he said finally. "If the complaint can be traced back to that resort, and if that email ties to your sister's husband, we're not talking about a neighbor's gossip. We're talking coordination. That's harassment. That's something we can build on." He asked me to send him copies of the note from the door, the screenshots, the bank statement, the flowers, the photo of the liar note from Sophie's backpack, and the birdseed footage. I emailed everything like a person handing over keys to a safe. When I hit send, a small part of my brain felt ridiculous, like I'd just uploaded my life to someone else's hard drive, but a larger part felt relieved. The folder felt heavier on my end now, with official eyes on it. Officer Ward called a week later with updates. He'd spoken to a detective in the other county and to a contact in the Maui Police Department. They'd corroborated the resort log and had flagged the email account. He told me the combination of financial charges on my card and the intentional, targeted acts: flowers to a child at school, an anonymous complaint, messages planted in a backpack, a late-night porch stunt, painted a pattern. "It shows planning," he said. "This wasn't impulsive. Someone sat down and decided to attack you while you were vulnerable." Hearing it said out loud made my stomach unclench a little. It also confirmed what I'd feared: this was a family choice. Not mom on a bad day, not dad making a mistake. All of them, to different degrees, had chosen it. They'd sat by the pool and decided to try to take the safe ground out from under me. That truth was both devastating and useful. Devastating because whatever remained of the family I used to recognize was gone. Useful because now I had a map of the enemy, for lack of a better word, and maps are for planning. Cal and I tightened our plan. The house would be emptied on Saturday. We kept the evidence folder within reach at all times, and we added photocopies of everything to a small box we planned to keep in the car on moving day. We decided, quietly, to let the legal process start without us yelling into the wind. We'd upload all our documents to the police portal once we hit the road. Officer Ward promised to follow up with the district attorney's office. We didn't know if the wheels of justice would turn fast enough to be satisfying, but they were turning. Then, the day before we moved, the mail truck backed up into our street like an omen. Cal signed for a thick envelope that required a signature. He set it on the kitchen table like a slab of bad news. The lawyer's letter inside felt even heavier than its paper. The return address belonged to a law firm I recognized from the town: small, neat, and practiced in keeping old money reputations tidy. We opened it together, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the smell of cardboard. The letter was clinical and cold. It accused me of running a campaign of slander and harassment against mom and dad. It demanded I retract my police report, delete my social media posts, and issue a public apology to my parents, or they would file for legal action for defamation. The tone was a practiced, slow threat. At the end, it asked me to respond within 10 days. Attached were affidavits, names I recognized, signatures I'd seen in church bulletins and at town fairs, a line or two from a neighbor, a paragraph from the head of the garden club. They all said the same thing in different voices, that I'd always been the dramatic daughter, prone to exaggeration, someone unstable when stressed. They had each attested in their neat, inked handwriting to my supposed history of emotional issues. For a moment, all the inboxes and evidence felt small and brittle. The affidavits were designed to do what they did, make my history a weapon. These were people who had known me since I was a child, and they'd been turned into witnesses against me. The letter wasn't just a legal threat, it was a social ambush. They'd painted me as the villain first, then they sent me the bill for being loud enough to get noticed. Cal sat down hard at the table and ran his hands over his face. Sophie played nearby, nesting a line of toy animals across the kitchen floor. The ordinary normalcy of it all was a knife in my ribs. I read the letter again and again, trying to find a mistake, an opening. I wanted to tear it up and throw it into the trash can, but I didn't. I slid it into the evidence folder. Every attack they launched, we documented. That was how we would survive. After they left the letter, a little voice started whispering in my skull, one I knew too well. Mom's voice, memory sticky and familiar, saying, "You are too much. You are difficult. You always blow things out of proportion." The town had always liked a story that fit neatly into a moral. The story where the daughter spirals and the parents suffer in silence was cleaner for them than the truth. The doubts came in like rain. Maybe I had been too harsh. Maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe my exhaustion from the pregnancy had made me paranoid and I'd read malice into benign mistakes. The lawyer's letter fed that old insecurity like gasoline. If enough people said you were unstable, would it become true? Would I lose my child after all this? In some bitter courtroom where a chorus of signatures from familiar faces sounded like jury duty against me. I sank onto a half-packed box in the living room and felt very small. I had spent so much time being the strong, methodical person in the center of the storm that this moment of weakness surprised me. The weight of the world felt like an actual physical weight, papers pressing against my ribs, the evidence folder heavy on my lap. For a minute, I imagined just walking away. Drive 2 towns over, change our name on the mailbox, let the past go. Let Mom and Dad and Tracy have whatever social comfort they wanted. It would be easy in some ways, it would leave fewer scars. But what about Sophie? What kind of lesson would that teach her about standing up for herself? What about the small, frantic fact that Mom had called her too much, like it was an illness you could discard? The idea of letting them win felt like losing some part of myself I couldn't bear to lose. At the very bottom of that flash of despair, Sophie padded up and climbed onto my lap. She smelled like crayons and apples. She handed me a piece of paper folded in the uneven way only a child can manage. Her fingers tapped a little. "I made this for you," she said, "for our family." I unfolded the paper. In the middle, in bright, careful crayon lines, were 4 figures under a sun with a huge smile. One figure had a round belly, one held a little book, 2 were small and hand in hand. Beside the house there was a tree with yellow circles all over it. At the top, in her careful 8-year-old printing, she'd written, "Our real family." The drawing hit me like a clear bell. The lawyer's letter, the affidavits, the whisper campaigns, everything shrank under the simple truth of that page. Sophie had not been tampered with, she had not been broken by this. She still believed we were her family, she still trusted us. The line I had to walk was suddenly bright and sharp. Safety for my children was more than paperwork and legal threats. It was the small, ordinary things of a life we could give them. It was bedtime stories. It was a yard where a lemon tree could grow. It was a mother and father who kept their promise to protect. I folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into my evidence folder like a talisman. The doubt didn't evaporate entirely, but it turned into something else: resolve. I would not let other people rewrite our story. I would not let Mom and Dad and Tracy make the truth disappear with a clever circle of signatures. The letter would go into the big folder, not the trash. We would pack the drawing into a box and drive away the next day, and we would build a place where Sophie could draw more pictures without fear. Cal reached across and put his hand over mine. "We keep going," he said. The words were small and steady and felt exactly like what I needed. We folded the letter into the evidence stack and added a note. "Respond through counsel only." We told Officer Ward about the lawyer's letter, and he said it meant they were scared. "If they're threatening you," he said, "that means you've made a dent." His calm was a kind of armor. That night, I sat on the floor of the nursery surrounded by packed boxes and watched Sophie tape another crayon drawing to the wall. The lemon tree house from her picture made me smile for the first time in days. The world might be loud and ugly at the edges, but there was a small bright center I could make for my family. I would file the papers, upload the evidence, and move us to a place where the phone calls from a small town couldn't reach. I would make the lemon tree real. The weight of the lies was heavy, but the paper in my hand was proof. The drawing in Sophie's hands was a map. I slid both into my folder and closed it, feeling the thud of it in my lap like the promise of new ground beneath our feet. Moving day arrived like any other big life moment, chaotic, noisy, and strangely ordinary. The truck was packed by 9, the movers taking our boxes without comment while Sophie ran between their legs, offering them juice boxes as if hospitality could disarm them. Cal did one last sweep through the house, checking closets and under beds, a soldier making sure nothing was left behind. I buckled Sophie into her car seat, her hair a messy halo from a morning of play, and watched her pick at the straps like it was the most important job she'd ever held. The last box sat on the passenger seat like a small, lethal animal. It wasn't labeled with tape and a marker. It was the evidence folder in a plain box: bank statements, screenshots from Tracy's social media, the photo of Mom's note taped to their door, the picture of the liar scrap that had been shoved into Sophie's backpack, the grainy clip of the hooded figure scattering birdseed, Dana Cole's note confirming the complaint was malicious, Officer Ward's case notes, the printed cease and desist. The folder felt heavier than it should. I ran my hand over it one last time, fingers tracing the edge like someone might memorize a shape. Cal slid into the driver's seat, his shoulders broad in a way that felt like a promise. He looked at me with tired eyes and asked, "Ready?" I nodded. My throat was tight, but the knot had changed. Where there had been a raw, splintering anger, there was now a focused purpose. This was the end of one life and the careful start of another. I climbed into the car, the seatbelt cutting across my belly, and took a long look back at the house. The walls that had held so much noise also stored all the strain and the phone calls and the nights I lay awake waiting. I didn't shed tears. I felt a quiet emptiness, a relief edged with grief. It was a house where everything had happened, but it wasn't where we belonged anymore. We didn't head straight to the highway. There was one final stop we had to make, the small, familiar path up to Mom and Dad's front door. Cal stayed in the car with Sophie, who had fallen asleep with a stuffed unicorn tucked under her chin. "I'll be right back," I told them, and walked up the path that used to feel like the easiest route in the world. My fingers trembled as I held the roll of tape and the single sheet of paper I had printed that morning. It was a crisp, high-quality image of Mom's crooked handwriting on that torn notebook paper. Under the photo, in 3 words I'd chosen carefully, I'd typed, "Now you understand." The door looked the same as it always had, the brass knocker, the little brass plaque my father had polished every holiday. I taped the paper to the center of it, smoothing the corners with the back of my hand, feeling neither triumph nor cruelty. It was simply an ending made visible, a bookend. I didn't wait to see their faces. There was no need. Whatever reaction they had would be their own problem to manage. I walked back to the car, my steps easy, measured. Cal started the engine and pulled away. For a second, I watched their driveway disappear in the rearview, and then I turned my face toward the future. An hour later, we stopped at a highway gas station so Cal could get coffee and Sophie could have a juice box. The sky was a clear sweep of blue, stupidly calm for the day that had already felt like an emotional war. I set the last box on my lap and opened my laptop. Officer Ward had walked me through the police portal a week earlier. His directions were taped on a post-it inside the folder. I had a paper copy of the case number, a list of file names, and the resolve to finish the job. The gas pumps hissed, and the smell of warm asphalt and frying oil made me feel small and human. Sophie sat in the back seat, twisting a curly lock of hair, humming quietly to herself. Cal leaned in from the open driver's window and mouthed, "You good?" I nodded. One by one, I scanned pages with my little portable scanner. The bank statement printed like a confession, the Instagram screenshots loaded with dates and captions. The photo of the door note looked ridiculous and raw when blown up on the screen. I uploaded the video clip of the hooded figure and a clear file labeled Backpack Note. Each file dropped into the portal with a small digital chime and a tiny green checkmark that felt like a bead of water into a long dry well. The evidence folder felt less like a burden and more like a ledger. What had been taken, what had been done. For the final upload, I dragged in the cease and desist letter they'd sent, the one that had tried to twist my whole life into a narrative that painted me as unstable. I typed a short summary as plain and factual as possible. This file contains documentation of child abandonment, unauthorized credit card charges, and a campaign of harassment, including the submission of a false complaint to Child Protective Services. I kept my tone flat. I had no desire to write a novel. I wanted the facts to speak. My finger hovered over the submit button, the little green check marks lined up like a trail. I took a breath, aware for the first time of how old I felt and how young at the same time. Then I pressed it. The screen spun, then a message appeared, submission received. A receipt slid into my email. I closed the laptop and let out a sound that might have been a laugh. Cal climbed back into the car with Sophie, who had sunk into sleep with her thumb at the corner of her mouth. When I felt the engine rumble, a strange lightness lifted off my shoulders. It was as if handing the folder into someone else's hands made what had happened real enough to be processed. We were not shirking what we'd done. We'd put the truth where it couldn't be ignored. It didn't mean the hurt would evaporate or that their reputations would be shredded in an instant. But it meant the machine of accountability was moving, and we were moving too. 3 months later, the little blue house we'd found felt like something we'd earned rather than bought. Sun came through the kitchen window in a warm sweep each morning, painting the floors yellow. We planted a lemon tree in the backyard on a wet afternoon in March, digging the hole while Sophie scattered seeds from a packet that was meant for tomatoes and laughing when the dirt got under her nails. She ran barefoot across the lawn and left tiny trails of dirt on the linoleum that Cal pretended to notice, because he liked that she was finding this place to be hers. My son, Leo, slept in a bassinet beside our bed. He was mostly peaceful, a tiny, stubborn thing who ate and slept and filled the house with the small noises that made a home sound alive. I watched him breathe and felt the fierce, uncomplicated love of a woman who had fought and kept fighting so her children would have safety. Sophie belonged here without reservations. She'd started a new class at school where the kids loved her for the strange, blunt jokes she told. Her shoulders had relaxed. She looked like a child again. Cal had switched to a reserve schedule and was home more often than he'd been in years. He painted the nursery soft yellow and put up shelves for Sophie's books and Leo's tiny clothes. Sometimes we'd sit on the back steps with mugs of tea and watch the lemon tree's first leaves shudder in a breeze that smelled faintly of the highway and something new. We didn't talk about Mom and Dad or Tracy unless necessary. Their names were edges in our life that we chose not to step toward. A letter from the district attorney arrived a few weeks later, the official kind with a state seal and a careful tone. Linda and Frank had accepted a deal. They were ordered to pay back the money they'd charged to my card, and they were given a term of supervision that would keep them from contacting Sophie for a set period. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter. Relieved, as if a lock had finally clicked. On slow evenings, I'd sit on the floor in the living room with Sophie, and she'd read to her baby brother in a voice that was clear and proud. She'd show him her drawings and declare where the lemon tree would go, and Leo would fuss and then settle like a tiny metronome between us. The house was sometimes messy, sometimes loud, often full of the ordinary things of raising kids. It was not perfect, but it was ours. When I look back now, the last box on the passenger seat feels like a hinge in time. Paper and pixels and slow, steady documentation did what yelling and crying could not. It didn't heal the old wounds, but it built a wall strong enough to keep them from reaching us. We planted roots in a different soil, and those roots have taken hold. Every time Sophie draws a sun with too many rays or hangs a crooked picture on our fridge, I think of the small, stubborn life we made from the wreckage. I think of the lemon tree already shading the yard, and I know that some endings are really beginnings in disguise. The envelope from the district attorney arrived on a slow Wednesday, the kind of day where the house felt too still and every small sound was louder than it should be. Cal handed it to me at the kitchen table while Sophie set out crackers for Leo, who was napping in his bassinet a few feet away. The paper had that official weight, a state seal in the corner and paragraphs written in a steady, formal voice. My hands didn't shake as much as I expected when I opened it. I think I was too tired to tremble. The letter said that Mom and Dad had been charged for what they did. The words felt both small and enormous: child endangerment and credit card fraud. They chose a plea deal, the paper said, to avoid a full trial. The agreement meant they would pay back the money they had put on my card, and they would be under supervision for a set time. Most important for me was the part about restrictions. They were legally ordered to stay away from Sophie for the next 5 years. There was no giddy triumph in me when I read it, no scene from a movie where the villain gets their comeuppance and the hero laughs. Instead, there was a deep, unclenching relief, like a taut string finally loosening. The people who had decided my daughter was too much could no longer walk into her life, call her, or send her anything. The paper made that permanent for a while. Officer Ward called later that afternoon to summarize what the letter already said and to say they would keep an eye on enforcement. He sounded tired but steady, and that steadiness is the kind of thing you learn to lean on. Tracy and Eric were not hit with criminal charges in the same way. The investigation into the false Child Protective Services report remained open, and Family Services had flagged them. They'd be watched. That felt important too. Not everything ended neatly, but the framework was finally set so we could stop watching the door. I filed the documents away carefully in a place that felt almost ceremonial. I did not dance or gloat. I made a cup of tea and sat on the back steps while Sophie dug little holes in the flower bed for her baby lemons. The sky was that clear blue that makes you think of the ocean, and for the first time in a long while I felt like keeping the world small and kind for my kids. That evening, I sat on the living room floor rocking Leo, the tiny weight of him warm against my chest. Sophie came over with a book and climbed up beside me, her legs tucked under her like she was settling into one of those family stories she loves to read out loud. Her voice was soft and steady as she narrated, and Leo blinked and settled, the sound of her reading like a small shield. When she finished, she rested her head on my shoulder and pointed at the fridge. Her latest drawing was there, taped up with a crooked magnet, 4 stick figures under a wide, smiling sun, a little blue house, and a tree dotted with bright yellow circles. In her careful print at the top, she'd written, "Our real family." I felt the familiar swell then, the fierce, uncomplicated love that had powered everything I'd done. All the evidence and police reports and long conversations had been for this little life, for the simplicity of a child who trusts you to keep her safe. That drawing was proof that our family had not been broken beyond repair. We were whole in the ways that mattered: shelter, food, safety, and love that showed up every single day. Cal came in and sat down beside us, and for a while we didn't say much. We watched Sophie turn the pages of another book, her voice alive and unbothered, and Leo's small fist curled around a blanket corner. Outside, the lemon tree we'd planted last month had fresh green shoots. We'd put a tiny painted rock at its base that Sophie decorated with glitter. The house smelled like dinner and baby shampoo and home. My revenge had never been about making people suffer. It was about protecting the ones I love and creating a life where my children could be children. It was about proof, yes, but more than that, it was about boundaries. The papers had made the boundary legal. Our day-to-day love made it real. Sophie laughed at a joke she told herself, and Cal and I looked at each other and nodded, the kind of look that says we did the right thing even when it was hard. If my story connects with you, tell me in the comments. Share how you set boundaries or protected your peace. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about family, survival, and starting over.